there was a building down in Mexico that had blue windows, for what reason I don't know. And every now and then, they'd fly the Mexican flag, and there were all kinds of brand new vehicles around there, and there were people walking the perimeter with military-style weapons. And guns are banned in Mexico. You may, with government permission, you may own a .22 or you may own a shotgun. And we were hearing automatic weapon fire down there a lot. Anyway, one day my wife and I are out here before the old barn collapsed, and the breeze is always from the southwest, and we smelled something that smelled like a doctor's office. Well, it finally dawned on us, ether. So I called a friend of mine who had been an undercover narcotics agent and told him about it. And he said, my God, if you can smell it at your house, they're making meth by the boatload. So he says, stay by your telephone. I'm going to have a DEA guy call you. So the DEA called out of Los Angeles, and we got together on a Thomas Brothers map, showed him where I was and showed him where the meth lab was. And I said, what are you going to do? He said, well, I'm going to give it to my counterparts in Mexico and they'll go close it down. The following weekend, my daughter decides to go shooting down there where the shooting range is. And my son calls up and he says, I'm going to come up and do some target practice. Okay. I go down there because my daughter never stops shooting until Dad runs out of ammo. She's 55 now, and that hasn't changed. Anyway, we go down there, and we're surrounded by the Mexican army. And they disarmed us. And we conned them into coming up to the house. And my daughter, we came through the brush. And I told my daughter when we got around by the old corral to head for the house. Regardless of what happens back here, you head to the house and call the Border Patrol. So she did. And we were more or less held hostage for 4 hours, and then the Border Patrol showed up and arrested them. And the patrol agent in charge gave me those pictures that he took himself. You can tell the way they're looking at the official camera, and he's over here taking pictures. And after he retired, so they couldn't retaliate, he sent me the copies of those pictures. And that was the start of our fun out here. And the cartels used to stage down south, cut the barbed wire fence and drive through with 4 or 5 truckloads of drugs at a time. And so one day they were staging down there, and the Border Patrol was here, and some of the guys that the Border Patrol called Maupin's Marauders were here with me, and they all went down towards the border, and I sat in that old green pickup truck with a Browning 1919 and a box of belted armor-piercing ammunition down here in the middle of the road. We had an east wind that day, and a new Border Patrol agent came down from the west, and they got him on the radio and said, get off the road, turn into Maupin's Gate, and go up to the house, and we'll let you know what's going on. So he comes in the big gate where we went down there, that big black gate. He came in there, drove up the road, and there's a spotter by this tower, just south of my house. He's got a radio and he's got binoculars. And this agent saw him, and of course he didn't hear the car because the wind is blowing into the guy's face and the car's behind him. So he goes up and grabs the guy and got on the radio and said, hey, I got the spotter. And they said, well, you just killed the deal because without the spotter, they're not coming across. So he comes down the road where we went down and went south. He was coming north, came around, pulls up alongside me, and he says, what on earth are you doing? And I said, well, when the trucks come up, I'm going to take the engines out, and I'm going to go through the windshields, and I'm going to kill every one of them guys. They're no longer going to come through my property with drugs, period. And little Mexican spotter was up against the window and his eyes were like, you know, the deer in the headlights. They all understand English. So they processed him back into Mexico, and about 2 weeks later, I get some guys came over to the house, and they were plainclothes, Border Patrol, intel, and said, watch your back, they put a $20,000 bounty on you. Now, I had ordered an FNFAL, which looks like those G3s, only it's a semi-automatic, not a... Those are actually assault weapons, they're machine guns. They've got semi and full automatic fire. I figured if it looked like theirs, they'd think I had something they had. Well, the first Bush had just signed the assault weapon ban. Now, an assault weapon is actually a machine gun. An AR-15 and AR-10 are not assault weapons because they don't fire full automatic. But the communists in our government want to ban them, so they call them assault weapons. Anyway, so the company I had ordered this from, I kept bugging them and bugging them. I had a gun store in Alpine at the time, and they said, we can't get the guns because even though we had bought them, paid for them, prior to the enactment of this law, Customs is holding them and won't let us have it, so we're having to sue the government to get them. This may take a long time. So how about we send you another rifle that shoots .308, the same thing? Okay, so they sent me a match grade M14, which the military has used for a long time. And so I got it. I was kind of disappointed, but oh well. And then a guy that used to hang out here that had been a sniper in the Corps saw it, and he says, you got a good piece of equipment here. Now you got to learn how to shoot it. I've been shooting since I was a kid. Time he got done with me, I'm shooting golf balls at 300 and 400 yards. I learned an awful lot about shooting from that man. And then one day I was walking down, going for a walk, and I walked down there towards the border. That was before my fence and before the steel fence. But after they put the bounty on me, and a couple of guys were walking up, they thought the ag fence was the border. The border was 60 feet south. On the south end of the Roosevelt easement, because Theodore Roosevelt, when he was president, took 60 feet off everybody's property from Brownsville to the Pacific Ocean. The Department of Agriculture put a fence up 60 feet in. Then in the treaty, the Mexicans were going to put a fence up on the border. They haven't done it yet. It's only been 100 years, so, you know. Anyway, there was a guy with a rifle and the guy with a gallon jug of water walking up there, and my dogs were run down there barking at him. They spotted the dogs, and then the guy with the water bottle spotted me, and the guy takes a rifle down. And he missed me by about 2 feet. So I pulled my M14 out from behind me and blew the water bottle out of the kid's hand. And they kind of got wet from the crotch down and made a new trail south. As I swung the rifle then over to the shooter, it was a bolt action rifle, and he'd pulled the bolt back, and when he saw me swinging towards him, it's that, oh shit, because his buddy, all he had was the handle of the plastic bottle. And my first round's always a hollow point. So when that hits a bottle of water, it just explodes. So they took off running. And I've not been shot at from Mexico since. I've had several people with guns that I've encountered, and they know what I look like. So they'd be sitting there with a rifle, and then they go, oh, and turn around and walk off. But like I said, it's been interesting living here. When my dad first bought the place, there was an old fella down there that had cattle like we did. And during the end of the 40s and into the early 50s, I grew up chasing cattle all over these mountains out here and herding cattle all the way up in the Laguna Mountains and the Cuyamacas. Can't do that anymore. There are too many houses, too many roads, too many fences. But back in the 50s, the Westerns were really, really popular. So I was living every kid's dream. I was doing it. I wasn't watching movies. I was doing it. And, of course, I had the strings of the Bull Durham hanging out of my pocket. That didn't work too well because I'd roll a cigarette and I'd light it and then I'd cough, which would blow everything out of the cigarette. So I didn't do very well that way. But it was a lot of fun. But my mother didn't like the schools up here. So I went to school in San Diego, which was how I met my wife. Our first date was October of my senior year it was actually my 18th birthday. And I belonged to a hot rod club. And we went up to, it was sponsored by the Elks. And we went up to Newport Beach for dinner, dancing, and yachting. The Elks didn't own any yachts. They had a bunch of old tugs, but no, there were some yachts up there, but they didn't own them. Anyway, we went up there on a date, and I ate my fish and chips, and Jeanette says, "You still hungry?" I said, "Yeah." So she handed me what was left. She said, "I'm done." So I ate the rest of hers, and we had double dated, and the other gal says, "You got room for some more?" And I said, "You bet." So I ate all of what she had left, and a big old clock on the wall. And my date, Jeanette, looks at it and she says, "You know, that suits you to a T." I said, "What? Benevolent Protective Order of the Elks?" She says, "No, biggest pig on earth." Now, I was really impressed. I mean, on the first date, you guys know how that, you're supposed to be impressing your date. Mm-hmm. That's how she impressed me, being realistic and not trying to be somebody she wasn't. And that was the end of my Marine career. I was going to be a career Marine because back when I was 10, being small of stature and with a large mouth, I was always getting beat up by the local bullies. A little friend of mine and I. So we decided we're gonna fix him. We went down and enrolled in San Diego Judo School. Then we found how much it cost. So we had about enough money for 1 month, which didn't teach us a whole lot. But we used to get up, I lived on a corner, and we used to get up on the lawn there, practice throwing each other, which in retrospect was tripping over each other. And this guy is one of my customers down the street. I was a paper boy. He used to come sit on the fire hydrant and laugh at us. He'd walking his dogs down in he was a huge man. Well, most everybody was huge when I was 10 anyway. And so I'm sitting there on the wall, and he says, "When's the show going to start?" And I said, "There won't going to be any more show." "Really?" I said, "Yeah." I said, "My friend's dad is an aircraft mechanic for the Navy, and things seemed to be heating up in Korea, so he left, and they went back home, wherever that was." And he says, "Well, you're still taking lessons?" I said, "No, I can't afford it." "Well," he says, "Bob, if it's okay with your parents, come on down to my house, and I'll teach you the fine art of self-defense." "Okay. When?" He says, "Well, if it's okay with your parents, well, about 1 o'clock today, we can start." So I said, "Okay." Well, I knew if I asked my mother, she'd say, "Oh, no, you're going to hurt yourself." My dad's up here, no telephone. I figured if I asked my dad, he'd say, "Okay." So I went down there, knocked on the door. Now, down in that part of town, a lot of the houses, the garage was out on the street, and the house was up behind it. And what I learned later was wrestling mat was out on top of this guy's garage. So I went down, knocked on the door, and he came out, and he said, "Okay, well, let's see what you know." So we walked out there on that mat, and he held out his arm. And he says, okay, let's see you throw me. So I grabbed his arm, and he lifted me off the ground with one arm. And I'm dangling off his arm thinking, oh my God, I'm going to die. So he set me back down, and he says, yeah, you got a lot to learn. So every day, all summer, I go down there. Now, I know I didn't have the strength to throw that guy. So he was obviously helping me. But he taught me all kinds of stuff all summer long. He taught me how to disengage a pistol, which I don't know if you know, but if you take the slide out of battery that far, it can't fire. So you jam your hand into it, drop the slide back. My fingers weren't long enough to hit the, get into the finger guard. But you hold on to the finger guard, and that way the gun doesn't work. And so while the guy is trying to figure out how come he can't kill you with a gun, you take the knife out of your pocket and do him in. And he taught me how to knife fight. He brought out some bayonets that said USMC, which a couple of my friends, their fathers had been in World War II. And so I didn't think anything about it. So right after my 11th birthday, school had started, and so we're just doing this on weekends. And he said, well, Bob, he said, we're done. I'm going to Okinawa. I remember Okinawa from the war. And I said, what are you going to do over there? He said, well, same thing you and I are doing. Really? Yeah, I want you to do me a favor. I said, what's that? When you turn 18, graduate from high school, I want you to join the Marine Corps, go through basic, go through infantry, and then come look me up. I want you in my outfit. Your outfit, what do you do? I teach hand-to-hand combat to Marine Raiders. You know 90% of what I teach. The other 10% you will not learn until you catch up with me. So from the time I was 11 till I met up with that beautiful little gal, I was going to be a Marine. And then after we both fell in love in high school and in the first year of college, I went to college instead of joining the Corps because if I had been deployed, she'd have a nervous breakdown. So I gave up on the Marine Corps and decided to become a mechanical engineer. I was racing cars and build speed equipment. Well, then Sputnik went up and you had to be an aerospace engineer. San Diego State College was becoming San Diego State University. It was kind of a mess anyway at that time, but they just dropped everything I needed. No, you got to be a rocket propulsion engineer. I don't want to be a rocket propulsion engineer. So I went home and we had a discussion, my wife and I, and she said, well, Bob, you got a good reputation as a mechanic. Why don't we try that for a while? So that's what I did. And after I blew my back by thinking I was a forklift instead of a fool, after I got where I could get out of bed, I got into a girdle with steel stays from my rear end up to my shoulder blades. I conned my way into a auto parts store as an outside salesman to learn that, and we were in the auto parts business for 30 years.